Hi there, I'm Brian Downs. You know this is Pro Sex Studio, and today we're going to be talking about that slacker classic, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and what kind of attitude the movie has towards sexuality and what kind of attitude it's selling you, the movie being an instrument of popular culture. You might think that this movie is about Scott's sex life. It's not. The first 8 minutes of the movie are devoted to Scott's relationship with Knives Chow. She is 17, he is 22. Their relationship is legal in their jurisdiction of Toronto, Canada, and of course different cultures and different jurisdictions have had different ideas about what the age of consent ought to be over all of human history. But obviously that's a choice. She is younger than he is, and she's quite young by the standards of Western society. That's designed to make us uncomfortable, and Scott comes in for a lot of criticism from his friends, his bandmates. He's in a band called Sex Bob-omb. The name of the band is about sex, but it's also a silly pun about sex. And the band doesn't seem to talk about sex or have anything to do about sex. So there's one anti-sex note already. She's 17, he's 22. We're supposed to feel uncomfortable about that. But also notice that his relationship with Knives has no sex in it. They don't even hold hands. They almost held hands once, Scott says, but then she got embarrassed. That's the point. Scott is dating Knives. He says dating. They don't even hold hands. There's no sex there. And we're supposed to be uncomfortable about how young she is. Although they're only 5 years apart. If she were 19 and he were 24, you wouldn't think anything of it. If another 6 months goes by and she turns 18 and he's still 22, would that be okay if they just waited 6 months? But the point is that's designed to make us feel uncomfortable about their relationship. She's too young. Although she is, physically mature. She's someone who clearly has romantic desire, sexual desire. She has an adult body. But she has to be 17. She could be 19. Why not? Why can't Knives be 19 and Scott 22? Because then we'd be comfortable with their relationship. And the movie has to make us uncomfortable with his relationship with Knives because Knives is pretty great. She's friendly, upbeat, high energy. She's supportive of his artistic endeavor with the band. She shows up on time. She's reliable. She's honest about her feelings. She has clear boundaries, and she's clearly into Scott. If she were 19 years old and Scott was 22 or 23 or 24, we'd all be going, yeah, great, he should be with Knives, of course. But we have to come up with some reason for her to be wrong, for some reason for us to not be comfortable with this relationship, so she has to be 17. All of Scott's friends give him a ton of trouble about it. It's ridiculous that he's dating this younger woman. I want to make clear that I'm 100% on Team Knives. Compared to Ramona Flowers, who will make her appearance shortly, Knives is better. Scott should be with Knives. So what is this? Well, this of course is some of our negative memes. I have identified 12 negative memes about sex that keep turning up in popular culture and film. And number 3 is, your problem is sex. In a protagonist, in a hero, an interest in sex, attempts to get sex, are regarded as problematic. That's what's wrong with them. That's why they're foolish. That's why they're pathetic. In Scott's case, he's interested in sex and romance and can't seem to get any sex. He's not even holding hands with Knives. And that makes him stupid and pathetic. With other characters, they're interested in sex and can get it, and that makes them stupid and pathetic. One of the people who gives Scott a lot of trouble about his relationship with Knives is his wacky gay roommate, Wallace, played by Kieran Culkin. Incidentally, Scott is played by Michael Cera, and Knives is played by Ellen Wong. Wallace and Scott, the roommates, are forced to share a bed out of poverty. That's funny, because they're sleeping in the same bed, but there's no sex going on. They don't have compatible sexual orientations. Well, 25% compatible. Wallace is gay and Scott is male. But there's no sex going on, and that's what's funny. In a scene later on in the film, Scott and Wallace are going to be joined in that bed by other Scott, a young man who, everyone in this movie is in their early 20s, a young man who's having sex with Wallace. But that scene is totally sexless, and that's what's funny about it. Everybody's fully dressed in the same bed, having some kind of conversation. The idea that Wallace's boyfriend is in the same bed as Scott and Wallace is funny. No sex going on. That's why it's funny, because it's pathetic, because nobody's getting laid. Moving right along, Scott's ex-girlfriend is named Envy Adams. Now, she broke his heart forever more than a year ago, and he's still wallowing in the pain. Notice that while Scott says that he dated Envy, there's no direct reference to them having a sexual relationship. No one ever says, oh, they used to screw like rabbits. Scott doesn't say we were lovers. We had terrific sexual chemistry. We were, it was fireworks in bed every time. Scott doesn't say that. Envy doesn't say that. There's no actual reference to their sex life, except to say that they were dating. Okay, dating implies a sexual relationship, but that's about as soft as you can get with the language. That's not an accident. You could have one line where Scott says, she was amazing in bed and then she broke my heart. We don't get that line. We don't hear anything about what drew Scott to that relationship or what pleasure he took in the relationship while he was there. We only hear about the bitterness and heartbreak. And this is negative meme number 1, the wanting disaster. Having sex, pursuing sex, attempting to get sex, sometimes even just talking about sex, leads to a bad result. Scott, we think, had sex with Envy or a sexual relationship, and then a year of bitter heartbreak that he suffered after that. And we don't hear about the sex, we only hear about the heartbreak. Negative, negative, negative. This is the wanting disaster, by the way, in the past tense, and this happens quite a lot in film, that there will be a relationship in the backstory and the ex shows up, and that's a problem. Very often the ex is the villain. Envy is one of the villains here, although she doesn't actually do anything particularly villainous. So, I guess. Also notice that Envy is really sexy. Ramona is attractive, Knives is adorable, but Envy is very vav vav voom, right? This is the negative meme. It's villains who sex, that's number 5. Villainous characters are often, very sexy, overtly sexy, seductive, full of sexual energy, and often have sexual relationships. And Envy had a sexual relationship with Scott, went on to have, we think, a sexual relationship with one of her bandmates in her band, The Clash at Demon Head. She and her band have gone on to big things while Scott and his band are still in the garage. It's villains who have sex. I said a moment ago, we think Envy and her bandmate in The Clash at Demon Head, Todd, have a sexual relationship, but again, no direct mention of that. They're kind of flirtatious with each other, but no one actually says they are lovers. They go to bed together. We certainly don't see them in bed together. That's all pushed as far off stage as we can get it, because, we don't want sex to be fun or anything. Enter Ramona Flowers. So, Scott encounters this girl, Ramona, around now and here and there. She's come to Toronto recently from New York, and he is smitten immediately. He sees her at a party and he makes a fool of himself trying to approach her. Again, the wanting disaster. You're interested in this woman, you find her sexually attractive, something bad happens immediately, you embarrass yourself. And then, after he embarrasses himself, his weirdly intense friend, Julie Powers, played by the erotically intense Aubrey Plaza. Aubrey, if you're listening, please, make yourself known in the comments section. Also, there's a comment section for anybody. Aubrey Plaza, Eliza Dushku, Megan Fox, Summer Glau, anybody. That's what the comment section are for. Let me hear your opinions about what I have to say. Instantly after Scott makes a fool out of himself, within 2 minutes of screen time, his friend Julie is angrily forbidding him from trying to hit on Ramona. You're not allowed to pursue a sexual connection here or a romantic connection because Julie feels it will drive Ramona away. Sex is embarrassing. Sex is alienating. Your problem is sex. Negative meme number 3. Along the way, by the way, we learned that Scott and Kim, the drummer in his band, are exes. Kim talks to Scott like he's a dumb asshole all the time. They dated in high school. Now, again, Scott's 22, so high school's 4 or 5 years ago. Kim is still angry about it, and we don't hear anything about what attracted Scott to Kim. At one point he says it was high school, she had freckles, that was it. We don't hear anything about the joy or pleasure or fun that was in that relationship. All we see is that Kim is still angry at Scott about it, and it creates problems in the band. Well, Kim, you might think about growing up. It was 4 years ago in high school. But again, this is the wanting disaster. Negative meme number 1. Wanting sex, having sex, trying to pursue sex leads to a bad result. So this brings us to 16 minutes into the film. By this point, Scott has spoken to Ramona exactly once, briefly, and is pretty convinced that he has alienated her forever. But his interest in Ramona causes all of his friends, Wallace, his roommate, Stacy, his sister, played by Anna Kendrick, by the way, in an early role. She's charming, as ever. All of these people say, you should break up with your fake high school girlfriend because you spoke to Ramona Flowers once and you think she's attractive. Right? Again, the wanting disaster. I'm maybe trying to pursue some kind of connection with Ramona, and everyone's yelling at me about what I'm doing. I should end my relationship with a girl I've never even held hands with, that is to say, Knives. Again, 100% team Knives. Scott's an idiot. So, the next morning, Scott has spoken to Ramona once briefly, and the next morning he receives an email from Matthew Patel, the first of the 7 evil exes. Matthew Patel is explaining the situation. Scott doesn't read the email, but Matthew issues his challenge for a duel to the death. Now, this movie obviously has a lot of magical realism and the video game theme and all that, but it does seem to be a duel to the death. The exes disappear. When Scott defeats them, they burst into a pile of coins and are never heard from again. It looks like they die. I mean, they seem to cease to exist. So, Scott has never held hands with Knives, he's never touched Ramona, and now he's facing lethal force violence from Matthew Patel, soon to be followed by 6 other challengers. Why? The wanting disaster. You try to pursue a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship, you try to have that in your life, and something terrible happens. People start trying to kill you by the half dozen. This is also negative meme number 2, dangerous sex. Sex is presented as being dangerous or tied up with danger. Also, danger is presented as being sexy. All of this is designed to make you feel anxious about your sex organs. Scott has learned that Ramona works as a delivery driver for Amazon, so he orders a package from Amazon, and lo and behold, she shows up at his door to deliver it. His interest in her again is presented as pathetic and embarrassing. And now let's talk about Ramona Flowers. Ramona is an asshole. Why is Scott interested in this woman? She is aloof and distant and hard to read and uncommunicative all the time. She's got a string of exes, all of whom are angry and bitter. That might be a red flag, bitter enough that they're willing to use lethal violence to express their feelings. Maybe that's a red flag about Ramona. Team Knives, 100%. So Scott says something like, well, if I sign for this package, will you agree to hang out with me tonight? And Ramona's like, okay. You know, again, not sounding interested. 1 foot out the door all the time with Ramona. But Scott's thrilled to be treated like an unwanted puppy. So off he goes. This is around the 23-minute mark in the film. They wind up at her place. And now we're going to talk some more about what's wrong with Ramona. And this is a sub-theme here, and it might be in its own meme. I need to do more thinking on the subject. Bad behavior in female characters, which, by the way, we would not accept in male characters. If we saw the same behavior in male characters, we would regard it as villainous. We would think it would mark that character as a villain, as trouble. But when women do this stuff, it marks them as being, I don't know, energetic, full of moxie, you know, nerve, that kind of thing. So she kind of reluctantly agrees to hang out, and then they go out for a walk in Toronto at night in the snow, so it's cold. They wind up at her place. They're in her kitchen. He's cold in his t-shirt. He's shivering, and she says, can I get you a blanket? He says, yes, please. She walks out of the room. She does not say, I'm going to go change my clothes, which is what she's doing, by the way. She goes to change clothes. She doesn't say, wait here, I'll be back in 5 minutes. She doesn't say, I'm going to change my clothes and bring you a blanket. She just walks out of the room. Well, shortly, Scott starts to wonder where she went, so he goes to find her. He sticks his head in the bedroom, and she is facing away from him in her bra, and she says, dude, I'm changing, and Scott throws his hands over his eyes, and now let's talk about this. This movie is allegedly about Scott's sex life. It's really about Scott's shame life. And it's presenting Scott as our relatable everyman, except Scott is a noodle. Right? Scott is not a man. He's barely a boy. He gets pushed around by everybody. And the movie tries to contrast that with him being some kind of video game ninja in his battles with the X's, which take place in sort of an alternate video game reality. But Scott is a noodle. He's not to be respected or admired or used as an example in any way. He makes terrible choices in his girlfriend, Team Knives. He does this. He throws his hands over his eyes and says, sorry, I'm just cold. Disavowing any sexual interest in her. Now, it's an accident that he's seen her partially undressed. Okay, Scott, why don't you behave like a man and say, I beg your pardon, and turn around and go back to the kitchen. Instead, he throws his hands over his eyes in this childish gesture, and he doesn't move. And he says, I'm just cold, as if he's disavowing sexual interest in her, but he is sexually interested in her, and she knows it, and we know it. But he has to pretend he's not. Because heroes aren't allowed to have sex lives. That's negative meme number 4, by the way. Serious people don't sex. Now, Ramona doesn't say, okay, could you close the door, please? No. What she does is she comes up to him and presses her body against his and says, here, does that help? She doesn't ask Scott if she can touch him, by the way. And while Scott has his hands over his eyes while he's hiding from this situation like a 5-year-old, he says, yeah, that's very warm. What is that? What is that? What was in the room when you walked in, Scott? She's not holding the bed frame against you. He doesn't recognize what a human body feels like when it's pressed against him. About Ramona not asking if she can touch Scott, I don't think she needs to ask. She knows that Scott's interested. They're alone together at her place. This is how sexual encounters happen. The idea that every sexual encounter ought to be a legal negotiation is absurd and disgusting and anti-human, and we need to throw that idea out. Communications experts tell us that it's not 20% of communication is the actual words you say, 80% of communication is how you behave. And by the way, how Ramona's behaving strikes us as realistic and believable. We, the audience, are going, yeah, that's charming, because it's how a lot of human beings behave. She doesn't say, hey, I'm going to manufacture a little encounter where you're accidentally going to see me in my bra. She doesn't say, I would like to have a sexual encounter with you. What do you think of that? Sign here, please. That's not how human beings relate to one another. And when you insist that human beings should relate to one another in a totally artificial way, when you turn every date into a rape on the verge of happening, and you create this anxiety and horror of sexuality, then you are doing what movies do, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself. But let's move on. He's temporarily blinded. She comes up, presses her body against his. Yeah, that's very warm, because he doesn't know what a human body feels like. What else was in it? What do you think that is? So he takes his hands away from his eyes. She's standing right in front of him. They kiss. Notice, the last thing Scott said was, I'm sorry, I'm just cold. Oh, what is that? I don't know what a woman's body feels like when it's pressed against mine. I am disavowing knowledge or interest in sexuality, and that has led directly to this sexual encounter. This happens a lot too. This might be a meme of its own, wherein especially male characters have to pretend they're not interested in sex, and that leads to the sex. What we want people to be is dishonest. What? No, I don't have any interest in you. Yes, you do. And that's clear to her, and that's clear to us. Why are these lies necessary? So they kiss for a few moments, and then Scott says, were you just going to bring the blanket from your bed? And she nods, and he says, maybe we should both get under it since we're so cold. Again, he's lying. Again, he's pretending this isn't about sex. You want to have a sexual encounter. She's clearly participating in it. She came over and pressed her body against you while your eyes were covered. Why is it necessary to tell these lies to the person you're with? What? Ugh! But this is what they sell us, this idea that truth can't be part of the equation. So they get into the bed. He's lying on his back. He's shirtless. She's sort of kneeling above him in her bra and panties. They're making out. And now we go back to bad behavior. She pulls back from a kiss and says, I changed my mind. And he says to her, literally he says to her, Changed it to what? From what? He has no idea what's going on, or that's his character. I don't know what's happening here. I have no knowledge of sex whatsoever. But also, she's not communicating. She hasn't made it clear to him what she wants. He doesn't know what she's changed her mind from, or to. She doesn't say, I've changed my mind to thus and such. He has to ask her. He has to draw that information out of her. She says, I don't want to have sex with you, Pilgrim. Not right now. And rolls onto her back. Okay, he says. She says, it's not like I'm going to send you home in a snowstorm or anything. You can sleep in my bed. And I reserve the right to change my mind about the sex later. Okay. Let's break that down. Imagine if this scene had been totally different. Imagine if they had gone back to Scott's place instead, and Scott had gone into the kitchen and started making spaghetti, and then put spaghetti on 2 plates and set the plates down in front of them at the table, and handed Ramona a fork, and then Ramona takes a bite, and Scott takes a bite, and then Scott says, I've changed my mind, and picks up the plates and puts them in the fridge. And Ramona says, to what, from what? And Scott says, I don't want to have dinner with you, not right now, but I reserve the right to change my mind about dinner later. Don't you think that Ramona would then have the right to force Scott to eat that spaghetti at knife point? Wouldn't that be reasonable? No, it wouldn't. It would be totally psychotic. Shut up. But she would have every right to be confused and put off and say, that's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. Why would you do that? All right? There's a way to do this. If you're starting to have a sexual encounter and you decide, I don't want to say, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, I've got second thoughts here. I'm not real comfortable with this. You could try doing that. No, she's aloof and 1 foot out the door all the time. And you know what Scott does? He thanks her for it. He thanks her for this. Get up and leave, Scott. Get up and walk out. Right? Okay, thanks, good night. No, he stays. Because this guy is a cup of noodles. The next morning, jump cut to the next morning, his first words to her are, so hey, can this not be a one-night stand? For one thing, I didn't even get any. That was a joke. He's begging her to see him again. This guy is a cup of noodles. And by the way, why do you want to be with her? Again, she is arrogant, aloof, doesn't communicate, doesn't explain what she wants or how she wants it, suddenly changes her mind 180 degrees. Why? Why? What's attractive about this? And notice again that Scott they didn't have sex. This movie's not about Scott's sex life because Scott doesn't have sex. He doesn't have sex with Knives. He hasn't had sex with Ramona. He has never made any explicit reference to having had a sexual relationship at any point with anyone in the future. He dated Envy. That's a word he uses, but not necessarily a sexual relationship. He dated Kim, his drummer, again. Not an explicit relationship. Not explicitly as a sexual relationship. Scott asked Ramona to come to the Battle of the Bands that night. Ramona's like, okay, yeah, you've got a band? Great. Again, this is her attitude all the time. Team Knives. Off we go to the Battle of the Bands. Everybody's there. Scott's there. Stacy's there. So that's Scott's sister, played by Anna Kendrick. Stacy's boyfriend, Jimmy. Scott's roommate, Wallace. Ramona shows up. Scott is surprised that Ramona showed up. I'd be surprised too, because this does not seem like someone you can depend on. Knives, on the other hand, is 100% dependable. She's there. Of course she is. She and Scott are dating. And Knives runs in. By the way, Knives has never kissed a boy before. We learned that earlier. She just runs in, jumps up, throws her arms around Scott, and kisses him on the mouth. Well, that seems like a pretty casual way to have your first kiss, but this happens in front of Ramona and Stacy, and now everyone's going, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Tension. Knives' first kiss serves only to set up conflict, unhappiness, heartbreak, the wanting disaster, negative meme number 1. Now, let's talk about Jimmy, Stacy's boyfriend. She says boyfriend, doesn't kiss him. I don't know if she holds hands with him. No explicit reference is made to sex. The word boyfriend is used, which is some of the softest language you can use. The word boyfriend is there. Doesn't say my lover, nothing, right? Doesn't make out with Jimmy. We don't see any moment of intimacy between them. What happens is that Wallace, Scott's gay roommate, steals Jimmy by the end of the night. So, sex is terrible. Stacy's relationship with Jimmy has had no pleasure in it, no intimacy, no sexual ecstasy, just unhappiness and pain, which is played in this film for laughs. Again, the wanting disaster, and your problem is sex. So let's take a moment to talk about Wallace. Wallace, and this is interesting, by the way, that a movie made in, I think, 2010 presents the only gay character as being like a high-functioning sociopath. Wallace's sex life is carried on without regard for other people's feelings. He steals Jimmy from Stacy right there, while they're sitting on the balcony. He has a varied and frequent sex life, but he doesn't seem to be having any fun with it. And I'm not sure if Wallace says boyfriend about anybody. He does talk about his sex life, right? But he doesn't seem to be having any fun with it or taking any pleasure with it. And his partners don't. And we never see him actually having sex or making love or making out. All we see is that Wallace's sex life is leaving a trail of damage behind him. Again, sex is negative. Your problem is sex. Wallace's great fault is that he has a varied and frequent sex life. But now we're distracted from the ratcheting tension at the Battle of the Bands because of all the girlfriends and jealousy and so on. We're distracted from that because Matthew Patel flies in and we have our first evil X in the big video game world confrontation. Sidebar, how does any of this make any sense? Why do the 6 evil X's agree to do this? Why do they care who Ramona is with today? They're not going to win her. That's not part of the equation. There's no version of this where Matthew and Ramona become a couple. Why are they working for Gideon? And why are they risking their lives to do it? What are they getting in return? Doesn't make any sense. And by the way, Ramona has that mind control chip, which is going to be revealed later. Gideon has installed a mind control chip in Ramona. If he has that ability, why not just use it to make her do whatever he wants? What's the point of this whole league thing? The real point here is that Scott has never had sex with Ramona, doesn't appear to be on any kind of track toward having a sexual relationship with Ramona, wants a sexual relationship with Ramona, has to face lethal force violence from a lineup of people just for desiring it. That again is number 1, the wanting disaster. Spoiler alert, Scott survives because in his video game alternate reality confrontations, he's super ninja as opposed to being, a case of noodles. So here we go, 43 minutes into the film, Scott and Ramona are at Scott's place at night, having a date, obviously. She's always one step ahead, he's a dope, she's smarter than he is, etc., etc. This is apparently presenting Scott as some kind of model. They're literally having a sexual encounter. They're engaged in foreplay. She makes a casual remark about his hair. He freaks out. He goes into this total insecurity fit, puts a hat on, says, "Let's go for a walk in the snow," because that's better. And this leads directly to the confrontation with Evil X number 2, Lucas Lee, actor skateboarder, played by Chris Evans in an early role. So that again is the wanting disaster. He's trying to have a date, a sexual encounter with this woman he's dating. He winds up in a fight for his life. It's 1 hour and 25 minutes into the film when, after having defeated the Katayanagi twins in another battle of the bands, the Katayanagi twins being 2 more X's of Ramona's, 1 more X, 2 more X's. I'm not sure how the math works out there, but Ramona leaves, right? Sex Babam has just fought an epic battle against their enemies and won, and Ramona's walking out the door and Scott has to chase her. Ramona always 1 foot out the door. And Scott runs out there and literally says to her, I know that you are aloof and unavailable and a big fat jerk in so many ways, but it doesn't matter because I'm in lesbians with you. He means love. Ramona, of course, replies with, "I'm dumping you." She says, "It's Gideon, I just can't help myself around him." Now again, we're going to find out later that Ramona has this mind control chip, which is a whole entire mess. Does she have agency here? Ramona is not to blame for how she treats Scott. Well, should Ramona be to blame for how she's treated the other 6 evil exes who she apparently treated with dismissive contempt? I was just a little bit curious. But he doesn't, she leaves. But just then, Gideon rolls up, played by Jason Schwartzman. Gideon is a music producer and promoter, and he says, I want to sign Sex Bomb to a 3-album deal, whips out the paperwork. And of course, the rest of the band says yes, and Scott says no, because Gideon, so Scott is out of the band, young Neil takes his place. Scott has lost Ramona, who he never actually had in any real way. They were not lovers. They weren't really in a relationship. She agreed that they were dating in her reluctant kind of, yeah, I guess we're dating way. That was all that was. He threw Knives away, which was a dumb move, and now he's lost his band. Why? Why have all these terrible things happened to Scott? Because he wanted to have a romantic and sexual relationship with Ramona Flowers. Number one, the wanting disaster. Oh, by the way, notice that Scott declares his love to Ramona before he's ever had sex with her. This is negative meme number 4, serious people don't sex. Heroes, people with responsibilities, people who think of others, don't have sex lives. A despondent Scott goes home to his little efficiency apartment, opens the door, and from inside the apartment you hear a scream, "Turn out the light!" It's Wallace. Scott turns off the light, and Wallace immediately says, presumably you just saw some guy's junk. Wallace is at home having sex in his own bed, in his own bedroom, when Scott walks in without knocking. Yes, they share the space, but Scott could have knocked. Wallace is having sex with some guy, a guy I don't think gets any name at all, and who doesn't look excited to be there in any way. Again, Wallace is having, the only person in this movie who's having a sex life is not having any fun with it. And that scene is treated like a scene out of a horror film, and Wallace has to apologize for it, because sex is a terrible thing. But soon, Scott gathers his courage. Well, he doesn't really gather his courage. Wallace tells him to go fight Gideon. Gideon calls him up and basically invites him to a final confrontation, because Scott is a truckload of noodles. He makes no decisions of his own. He's basically goaded into it. He's going to go off to fight Gideon. Why does this make any sense, by the way? As far as Scott knows, Ramona dumped him to resume her relationship with Gideon. That's all he knows. Then what are you doing? What are you fighting for? Scott, by the way, has just become Evil X number 7. Because like the other Evil X's, he's here to interfere in Ramona's current personal life. Yes, Ramona has a mind control chip, but Scott doesn't know that. Having been treated scornfully and contemptuously and dismissively by Ramona, he's now willing to do lethal force violence to Ramona's current partner. So that's a little screwed up. Also notice that Ramona treats her partners this way, and that's fine. It proves that Ramona has moxie. When Gideon treats Ramona this way, it makes Gideon the villain of the piece. This is bad behavior by women, which is probably its own meme. We see behavior in female characters that's presented as being awesome. You know, it shows that they've got guts. Whereas when male characters do the exact same thing, it makes them the villain. I think this is done to make sex cause anxiety. To say, hey, you don't want to be in a sexual or romantic relationship because this is how women behave and everyone lets them do it, including the audience. I think that might be the 14th meme. I'm going to have to develop that idea. So Scott goes down to the Chaos Theatre Toronto, which Gideon owns. He's a music promoter and it's a venue, and goes in there and says, I want to fight you for Ramona. And Gideon says, why would you want to do that? And Scott says, because I'm in love with her. Well, Scott, she's awful, so I'm not sure why. But Scott gets a power-up weapon. Scott scores points. Bing, bing, bing. This glowing katana appears. Scott earned the power of love. That weapon shatters the moment he crosses swords with Gideon. So the power of love apparently isn't worth very much. Then Knives Chow comes zooming in, kicks Gideon's weapon out of his hand, interrupts Scott and Gideon's fight, and then she turns around and attacks Ramona, feeling that Ramona had stolen Scott from her. Scott has to go and explain, no, stop fighting, ladies. No one stole anyone. You see, I dated Ramona after I dated Knives. I just maybe didn't tell Knives when our relationship was over. And it's at that moment that Gideon sneaks up behind him and stabs him to death, runs him through. Boom, you see Gideon's weapon burst from Scott's chest. Scott's dead. You know when you get killed? You get killed when you're talking about the bad way you handled your sexual and romantic life. Although really, again, it's not the story of Scott's sex life, it's the story of Scott's shame life, because Scott hasn't had sex with either of these people. And as far as we can tell, never will. Scott's dead, but death is a dream sequence in a desert scape where Scott's like, I'm dead, and for some reason Ramona is there, and this is when she chooses to explain that she has a mind control chip. But is this Scott's hallucination? Is this the real Ramona? I guess so. So, while he's dead, Scott earns a one-up life somehow, which allows him to rewind time and go back to the Chaos Theater. And when he reappears at the Chaos Theater, the first thing he has to do is apologize to Kim, his drummer, or the drummer in Sex Bob-omb, who he dated in high school. Sex Bob-omb is there performing at the venue. They don't look happy to be performing there. They got their contract and they're making money and they're professional musicians now, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, because sell out. But he apologizes to Kim, and Kim smiles, and Scott earns points. He says to her, what is it? I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry about me. That's his job, to apologize. This movie is the story of Scott's apologies for his sex life. That 5 years ago they dated in high school briefly and it didn't work out. And Kim apparently has been angry about it ever since. If a male character behaved this way, that would be weird. We'd be like, dude, let it go. Kim does it. It proves that she's got nerve. Scott then defeats Gideon and then apologizes to Knives and Ramona for how he handled his overlapping relationships with them. I cheated on both of you. I'm really, really sorry. Again, this movie's about how Scott should apologize for his sex life. And Scott has not handled that very well. But remember, of course, that that is the story. That's the story they constructed. They could have made a story where Scott stays with Knives because clearly she's the better choice, but they don't. They deliberately construct, the filmmakers deliberately construct this story where Scott's ashamed. That's negative meme number 3, your problem is sex. As soon as Scott makes this apology, Ramona's mind control chip shorts out, and she is no longer under Gideon's control. Well, wait, why? What does the mind control chip have to do with Scott's relationship with Knives and Ramona? Why does it short out now? Why does it short out at all? And, incidentally, when Scott returned to the Chaos Theater here for the second battle with Gideon, he shows up and says, I'm fighting you for me. He's not fighting for Ramona. The first time he was fighting for Ramona, now he's fighting for him. And he earns the power of self-respect, another power-up weapon. That makes no sense. This second time, you know that Ramona has been enslaved by the mind control chip, so now it makes perfect sense to fight for Ramona. You're fighting to free Ramona from this unethical control, this slavery. Now you're fighting for yourself. Why? How does fighting Gideon do anything for you? That makes no sense at all. And again, by the way, that's another weapon, the power of self-respect, that shatters in the battle with Gideon. The second weapon to shatter in the battle with Gideon. Because, plot twist, Gideon's not dead. He jumps up and challenges Scott. Let's fight. Ramona is now free of Gideon's control, and Scott has apparently apologized enough, but he has to fight Gideon and kill Gideon. Why? So he goes back to fighting Gideon, but his self-respect weapon shatters. And Ramona gets in on it by kneeing Gideon in the balls, and Knives jumps in the fight on Scott's side. Why? Knives has no idea who Gideon is, but she's in the fight. Knives and Scott finish stomping on Gideon and kill him, which turns him into a huge pile of money, which Scott's bandmates start stuffing into their pockets. So apparently Scott's killing people for money. No. And now, at the end of the film, Ramona says to Scott and Knives, you two make a good couple, and Ramona turns and walks out. It's Ramona who makes the choice that Scott stay with Knives. But no, wait. Knives then says to this warehouse full of noodles that is Scott Pilgrim, no, go be with her. You should go be with her. Don't worry about me, I'm too cool for you anyway. Scott does whatever the woman physically closest to him at the moment tells him to do. Whatever the most recent woman who is physically near him tells him to do. So then Scott goes after Ramona, but they don't have sex. What happens is he chases after her in the snowy street and says, hey, mind if I tag along? And Ramona turns and says, you want to come with me? And Scott says, yeah, thought maybe we could try again. And Ramona holds out her hand, and they take hands, and they go down the street, and apparently through a door that's standing in the middle of the street for no reason. And the camera pans up to the word continue hanging there in the sky with a countdown, 9, 8, 7, as when a arcade cabinet game is asking you to reinvest with more quarters. But we don't see the countdown end, and we don't know if they reinvested. And we don't know if they go on to become lovers, and we don't know if their relationship lasts more than another 48 hours. The movie doesn't tell us any of that. Scott doesn't go on to have a sex life that can be proven or even heavily implied. It's extremely ambiguous. Scott has gone through all of this and killed, I think, 7 people to not get what he wanted, which was a relationship with Ramona. And why would you want to be in a relationship with her anyway? She's awful. If you think that Ramona Flowers is terrific and you'd like her to be your girlfriend, put that in the comments. Please like, subscribe, share this on social media. That helps. If you disagree with me, by all means, explicate your argument in the comments. In conclusion, this film is so thoroughly fucked up it's hard to describe. That's why this episode has been so long. It is so relentlessly sex negative. It's terrifying. It's oppressive. And yet, it presents itself as a funny little story about love. Who's loving who here? Right? Who is in love? Who's enjoying their sex life? We've got Wallace, who's evidently a joyless sex addict. We've got Scott, who's chasing all the wrong people. We've got Knives, who's smarter than all of them. This is what you're getting in your popular media. This is the message. Relentless.